In this lesson, we'll talk a little bit more about manipulating our geometry in Mudbox before we get started talking about sculpting and painting. So this is 08 Begin, and all it really is just a bunch of different meshes here in Mudbox. And so let's just cover this a little bit more in depth as far as dealing with these. So we can select them here in the object list, and you can see they're highlighted in yellow as those are selected. We can also go to the Select and Move tools and select them in our viewport. Oh, let me select objects rather. We can select those objects. All right. We can also move them around. So if we want to, for instance, take this plane and move it, we would go to Translate. And we could, scale this up. And we could rotate it around. And you can see those values are reflected here in our properties. And so you can also put numerical values in there. We can also duplicate objects, so right-clicking on the plane will give us the option to duplicate this object. It'll create a new piece of geometry here, which we can then go in and, for instance, rotate that back around maybe. Kind of rotate this back. You translate it. Okay, we can also take these other objects, so maybe take this cube and maybe move it down and maybe over, take the reptile, move it down. You can start to just kind of set up your scene. All right, so we can move this around. Now, if there are objects you don't want to be able to select and move, you can lock them. So we can come in here under the lock. We kind of already looked at this, but we can kind of lock that. And so now it's sort of a light gray. And we can actually move it if we select it in here, but we can't go in and now sculpt this. We can sculpt anything around it, but the sculpting is not going to affect the model if we lock that. We can also turn the visibility of each model off. Okay, we can also freeze parts of the model. So instead of just not being able to select the entire model and sculpt it, we can actually freeze parts of it. So we can go to our sculpt tools, go to freeze, and you can see I can turn this blue. So now when we come in and if we were to sculpt this, the sculpting, and there's a little bit of a fall off, but the sculpting is not going to affect the parts that are completely blue. It'll sort of affect the parts that are kind of blue in that transition area. We can also go up here to edit and go to freeze, invert freeze, or unfreeze all to do the same thing. There are also options for locking in here. So Shift F would be lock selected, and then we could invert that, and then we could unlock all. Also, if you just want to look at one particular model, we looked at this earlier, you can right click and go to isolate and toggle that on and off. Okay, this also gives you the option to lock and unlock and select and show. So the showing and hiding can happen in here or via right click. And also you can freeze your model or lock it in different ways as well. So freezing, you can do that in here, or you can lock it. And then you can do the same thing here with your right click context menu. And then also in your object list. Now if you want to, let's say, create the same lizard over on the other side, so mirror it across a particular axis, we can duplicate our model. So we duplicate it just like we did the plane. So right click, duplicate object. We've got the new reptile. It's sitting right on top of the old one. So we'll go to mesh, flip mesh, and then we have the option to choose what axis we want to flip this around. We can flip it around the world XYZ or local XYZ, or we can flip it from Y up to Z up and so forth, depending on what we want to do. So we'll want to just flip it around the X. And so there you can see it's taken that copy and flipped it across. If you just do flip on your original, it's going to flip that. It's not going to actually create the copy, so you have to duplicate your model first before you do that. And then you can move it around just as you would with any other model here. All right, so now that we can kind of move things around and change the visibility and lock things down and freeze things so that we're not affecting them, let's take a look in the next lesson at a sculpting and painting overview. So we'll talk about some of the brushes and how those brushes work, and then we'll talk talk about kind of fall offs and working with symmetry before we actually start getting into our proper project. So we'll go ahead and do that next.